Chapter 2. The children have been staying with members of the church community that the Roms belong to, Sally explained as they sat in her office. I'd like to have them transferred into your custody as soon as possible to help ease the transition away from those families. Each child has an education fund, which will continue to grow from the trust fund setup. Excuse me, Cynthia interrupted. Where am I supposed to house them if I take them? What do you mean, if you take them? Derek looked at her in surprise. Why wouldn't you have custody of them? Kids weren't exactly in my life plan, Cynthia responded dryly. You know what will happen if you don't. He frowned as he remembered his own childhood. They'll go into foster care. Maybe the youngest will get adopted, but the rest will be in the system until they're 18. As good as some foster parents are, there are bad ones out there too. Maybe my uncle will take them, she shrugged uncertainly. The old guy who's about to retire because he has Parkinson's? Derek wondered what Cynthia was thinking. When it came to the law, she was a genius. This? He seriously wondered where she was going to do in her state of mind. Sally sensed that Derek was on her side, and gave him a more friendly smile than the ice-cold one she'd given him before when they'd first met. The Roms' family home is more than large enough to keep the children, the pets, and both of you. Pets? Cynthia frowned as she remembered the menagerie of animals Alicia tended to keep. Both of us? Echoed Derek with a bit of alarm. Whoa, we are not together. I'm sorry, I thought you had that feel about you. Sally paused. Like a couple. What pets? Cynthia persisted. She remembered a couple of dogs and a bird, but Alicia had a habit of adopting stray animals. Everything could have changed since her last visit. Sally regathered her thoughts. A couple dogs, a cat, a hamster, some fish, the usual. I can't have animal hair on my suits. Cynthia pursed her lips like they were sucking on a particularly bad lemon. Oh, and the parrot, Sally added as an afterthought. A parrot? Derek was starting to like the deceased Alicia and Guy. They seemed as far removed from Cynthia's type A personality as possible. That's cool. Is it potty trained? Cynthia inquired. She couldn't remember it from her last visits what the bird did with its business. Surely she wouldn't have to look after that. I'm sure the oldest children know how to deal with the bird, Sally tried to reassure her. Obviously, you've met all of the children before, so I'd like to set up a meeting between you and your caseworker. Most of them, Cynthia muttered. Caseworker? Yes, Sally continued. The children have a caseworker assigned to them to look out for their best interests. She will occasionally visit to make sure that things are progressing nicely. Derek remembered what it was like to have a caseworker. He'd gone through several. Who is she? Sally looked at him in a bit of confusion. If you're not romantically involved, then why are you here, Mr. Kramer? I'm her paralegal, he clarified. He's my PA. Cynthia effectively demoted him to Missy's status. There was nothing wrong with being a PA. It just wasn't his job. Derek chose to keep his mouth shut. He didn't need to get into any sort of disagreement about his job status in front of another attorney. He idly wondered if Sally was hiring. Then again, with the way he initially put her off, there was more chance of him becoming Santa than getting a job here. Okay, Sally decided to drop the matter. We also need to talk about the funerals. With Guy being estranged and your parents being deceased, the final decisions of the funeral will fall to you, Cynthia. I've never planned a funeral, Cynthia frowned. Is there someone we could hire? Like a wedding planner? Sally seemed a little nonplussed for a moment. Most of the details have already been taken care of with the pre-planned funerals that Guy and Alicia had already purchased. However, it would be nice if you took a personal interest. You could meet with the pastor to select hymns and verses. There's a budget set aside for flowers. Pamphlets will need to be printed. Did you write that down? Cynthia looked at Derek. He grabbed his cell phone and started to take notes. He'd never been to a funeral. It sounded complicated. I'll give you the contact information, but it'll be up to you to see to arranging the final specifics. Sally rummaged for a page and held it out. Cynthia passed it to Derek. He quickly folded it and put it away for later. He wondered if there was a crash course on how to handle a funeral, something that was 10 minutes or less. Derek would possibly find some how-to lists on the internet. If she's available, you'll meet the caseworker tomorrow. Then the children can be released into your care. Here are the keys for Alicia and Guy's home." Sally handed them to Cynthia. "The children are the sole beneficiaries of the estate. However, you have been granted a fund to use for the cost of their care. Since you are a fellow lawyer, I'll send you the paperwork rather than explain it." "Well, that sounds good," Cynthia nodded. She didn't see any point in wasting both their time when she could have her own lawyer look over the particulars. Sally hesitated. "Miss Stone, I know that this whole thing has come as a shock, and that you are expecting to become a guardian. However, you need to decide if this commitment is what you want to take on. These kids need someone to be permanently in their lives, especially since they've lost both parents so quickly." "They're Alicia's kids," Cynthia stated. She remembered what Derek said about the children going into foster care. If there really was no one else, she guessed they were stuck with her. "Of course I'm going to help them." "Cynthia," Sally persisted, "they are going to become your kids. You will essentially be their mom. Are you ready to commit to that?" Cynthia thought for a moment. She looked at Derek. "What if I'm not any good at it? I'm not exactly maternal." "They need you," he said simply. "There is no one else." She strengthened her resolve and faced Sally. "I'll do it." The meeting with the caseworker was set for the very next day. The day after that, Cynthia would go and collect the kids. It would be a time of big changes. Cynthia decided to take Derek along as reinforcement. Not that she was going to tell him that. He thought she needed him to take notes or talk over cases in the car, trying to catch up on their always overloaded work schedule. Cynthia thrived on her job. Now she wondered if having 5 kids was going to interfere with her career. Maybe she would get Derek to hire a nanny. It would be expensive, but well worth the money if she didn't have to worry about diapers and whatever other stuff children needed. Yes, a nanny was definitely what she needed. Preferably someone without a home life who wanted to move right in and adopt Alicia's little clan. Maybe 2 of them. Then Cynthia could keep running her life as she saw fit. Derek and she talked over the Underhill case and what the interview with the new clients had revealed. They also discussed what angles to take in the courtroom, Derek taking furious notes to type out for her later. When they arrived at the social services building, Cynthia frowned at the drab gray brick. It looked very depressing and old compared to the glass law firm where she worked. The driver helped her out of the vehicle. She went into the building with Derek in her wake, giving her information to reception. They were told to wait in the lobby for the social worker that was taking on the Roms case. Cynthia took a seat, continuing to lob things out for Derek to write down. She was so into her work that she didn't notice the approach of someone until Derek cleared his throat pointedly. "Oh!" Cynthia leapt to her feet, extending her hand, and looked in disappointment at Allison Greenweld. "Allison, how good to see you!" "I wish I could say the same." Allison did not shake her hand. It was a pointed gesture. "Please call me Mrs. Greenwell." "Okay, then, Mrs. Greenwell." Cynthia stood up a little taller. "Are you here to take me to the caseworker who is handling the Rom's custody case?" "I am your caseworker." Allison allowed a malicious smile. She tilted her head. "Why don't we go to my office?" Said the spider to the fly, Derek thought briefly. Allison Greenwell was a scary woman, scarier than Cynthia, and that was saying a lot. The 2 women had faced each other in court numerous times, and it was safe to say that neither was a fan of the other's work. Derek didn't think this was going to go well. "Sure," Cynthia put a smile on her face. It was entirely fake, but at least she was trying. They followed Allison to her office. "Oh, he doesn't need to come in." Allison looked at Derek dismissively. "He's just your PA. This is personal business." "He's my paralegal, and I require him to be present at this meeting." Cynthia gave her tone a slight edge. Allison stood firm, knowing she was wielding all the power in this particular encounter. "I'm sorry, I just don't see what benefit his presence would be." "I can just wait in the lobby," Derek offered, but the 2 women ignored him. "He takes notes for me," Cynthia said sweetly, not backing down. "I depend on him to remember things that I don't." "Getting a little older, Miss Stone? Is your memory not what it used to be?" Allison looked at her with false concern. "If you're experiencing early onset Alzheimer's, I'll have to ask you to take a medical to make certain you are fit to retain custody of these children." Cynthia's teeth clamped. "I'm perfectly mentally cognitive, thank you." Just to clarify, Allison faked smiled. The PA can stay in the lobby. Which is what I suggested, Derek chimed in. Fine, Cynthia growled, knowing that round 1 had gone to Allison. Excellent, Allison said smugly. Please follow me. Derek wasn't sure, but he might have heard Cynthia growl as she passed him. He did not envy Allison Greenwell. He slouched in one of the uncomfortable lobby chairs, working from his phone to put a dent in their caseloads. 40 minutes later, Cynthia returned. Is the car ready? She asked curtly. How would he know? He had no idea how long their meeting was going to take. Maybe, Derek called the car service. 5 minutes. Cynthia huffed. Where's the nearest coffee place? I need something sweet. 2 minutes later, they were in line at the nearest coffee house chain, and Derek was redirecting the car to their location. Do you know what that woman said? Cynthia couldn't contain herself any more. She practically vibrated with frustrated energy. No, I wasn't there, Derek commented on the obvious as he waited on hold with the car company. She doesn't think I'm fit to be a guardian to these kids. She thinks I'm going to fail. Cynthia glared at the person in front of her, who happened to look back. The man quickly turned around again. I never fail at anything I choose to do. Derek chose not to comment. It was probably better that way. Just because we had a small disagreement in court doesn't mean that she can be such a self-righteous snob. She's looking down her nose at me. She expects me to suck at this. Cynthia growled and tapped her foot. Disagreement in court? Cynthia had torn Allison to pieces on the stand. Obviously, she still bore a grudge. I am not going to fail. I'm going to be the best aunt there ever was, Cynthia grumbled. Really? When? Right now, their schedule is looking pretty full. Aren't you going to say anything? She turned to him expectantly. Yes, I'd like to change the address to where we are getting picked up, Derek informed the car service, who had thankfully picked up the phone in time so that he didn't have to respond to Cynthia's question. She probably didn't want his honest opinion. He made the arrangements so the car would meet them when they were done here. Well? She demanded as he ended the call. Well, what? Derek tried to look puzzled. He wasn't sure he succeeded. Sometimes it paid to play the I'm not paying attention 'cause I'm a guy card. She rolled her eyes and gave a huff of annoyance before turning to place her order with the clerk. Derek waited for his turn, then placed his order. He barely got his before Cynthia was ready to leave. Order me that Parenting for Dummies book, she told him. I'm going to need all the tips I can get if I'm going to win. She won't even let me hire a nanny. A nanny, for pity's sake! Lots of people get nannies. Derek sighed. Parenting isn't about winning. You can't win or lose as a parent. Cynthia frowned. Really? Are you sure about that? Yes, he said dryly. He'd ordered the book anyway, since it just might help her. Then again, she'd just tell him to read it and inform her of the important parts. Better that he get the cliff notes. Then how do I stick it to Allison? She wondered, a frown marring her face. By doing what you can for these kids? Derek shrugged. Shouldn't be about winning against Allison. It should be about helping your nieces and nephews. Their car arrived, and Derek got the door for her. Soon they were on their way. I get the kids tomorrow. Cynthia took a bite out of her Danish. You need to talk to the pastor, florist, and a printing company today. Allison is watching, Derek reminded her. This is your sister and brother-in-law. You need to be making these decisions on these arrangements. That means you need to be involved. Cynthia sighed, leaning back against the car seat. I hate funerals. That doesn't change the fact that you need to be there, he pointed out. Fine. Cynthia chewed her pastry with vigor. Great. Derek gave the driver instructions on where the funeral home was. We'll start by talking to the funeral director. Cynthia ate the last bite of her Danish. I should have bought a whole box instead of just one. It's going to be that sort of day. Derek privately agreed. He offered her the extra donut he'd bought on a hunch that she was going to need it. She took it. They made the rounds to the funeral home, the florist, the pastor. When they reached the printers, they hit a snag. While they could fill in many of the details of the funeral after talking to the pastor, they needed a photo of the couple. Cynthia didn't have one. Since she'd been given a key by Sally Winthrop, Derek suggested that they look for an appropriate photo at the Rom's house. It was a large house in an older gated community. Derek, who had only ever lived in the inner city, looked at it in appreciation. It looked like any wholesome home on television. Cynthia opened the front door and they both went in. "When's the last time you were here?" Derek asked as he took in the quiet and empty atmosphere. "Thanksgiving," Cynthia replied. It was eerie how quiet it was. Every time she visited it was like a zoo with all the kids and animals. "Since you take it off, I usually come here if I manage to get caught up at work." "You don't bring any work with you?" Derek was surprised. She seemed like the type that would bring work with her everywhere, including on vacation. Then again, Derek didn't think either of them had gone on vacation in the past 8 years. "There's no point." Cynthia went to the living room and started looking through the photo books. "It's always too noisy and distracting here. Wait until the kids and pets come, then you'll understand." Then he'd understand? Whoa, wait a minute, Derek thought. "Excuse me? I don't need to be here. This is your gig." Cynthia flashed him an unamused smile. "Oh no, if I'm going to do this, you're going to help." "Not in my job description," he pointed out as he looked through another photo book. "What about this one?" "That's 10 years old. Something current." Cynthia rejected it. "You're hereby promoted to honorary uncle. That means you get to help." "No." Derek snapped the book shut. "Absolutely not. I have enough to do." "I'll give you a 10% raise," Cynthia said mildly as she continued searching. 10%. Derek blinked. "I'm in." "Good." Cynthia held up her book, showing him a photograph. "We'll use this one." "Are you sure? You don't want to go through the rest of the books and make certain that's the right photo?" he asked. "This is the one I want." Cynthia brushed past him. She looked around the house from the foyer. "It's not right, them not being here." "It's not about right or wrong." Derek put the photo book he'd been looking at back and joined her. "It just is." Cynthia swallowed thickly and led the way out of the house. Derek sighed. He should be working. He had dealt with the insurance company of the Roms, submitting an obituary to the papers, then confirmed details with the pastor for the pallbearers and the ushers before giving the information to the printing company. His regular work had piled up, and he certainly had enough to keep himself busy for the next few hours. Instead, he looked over the farm of cubicles to see where the action was. Today, Henny was floating around with donuts. She was cackling at something Roger said. Derek could see her practically preening her feathers, trying to gain Ruddy Roger's attention. He was more interested in the donuts than her. His mustache twitched and his beady eyes looked over the choices as Henny squawked on about the differences between the strawberry twist or the raspberry-filled powdered ones. Derek likened her to a hen and him to a weasel. Ah, there was Merle as always, popping her head up over her cubicle to take in the action. She wrinkled her nose in distaste, showing off her prominent overbite before descending straight down. Henny, ever gracious, offered Derek a donut. He took one because he didn't want to offend her. Also, they were delicious, so it really didn't hurt his feelings to eat one. As Henny moved on, Merle popped her head back up like the groundhog Derek sometimes imagined her to be. "Those things will kill you." She snapped off a bite of celery. "Cholesterol." Derek nodded knowingly. "I plan on a heart attack 3 days before my retirement. I hope you'll be there." She glared at him through her glasses and descended downward again. Minnie brushed by Henny to scoop a donut. There was no polite way to say of what he thought of Minnie. She wasn't small. He often likened her to an Angus cow. Not because of her weight. Actually, she'd gone through a period where she dieted and exercised, losing a great deal of weight. Unfortunately, she was a much happier woman when she ate chocolate in large quantities, which she did often, causing her to gain the weight back. Derek happened to think she was awesome when she wasn't pining for cocoa, and since she'd given up on her latest diet, she was much easier to get along with. No, it wasn't her size, which did look beautiful on her. It was the way she chewed and chewed and chewed, like a cow chewing her cud. She took a bite of the donut, and it took her 50 chews before she would swallow. Derek knew, because he counted. He shook his head and watched as she moved slowly onward, still chewing. It really was a cubicle farm. "Hey, Derek." Bob leaned over the cubicle. "Hey, do you have any staples? Hey, man?" "Hey, Bob," Derek replied. He couldn't help return the hey each time Bob said it. Derek searched through his drawer and handed the beleaguered little man with the goatee a pack of staples. "How's it going?" Hey, it's a rough day. Bob shook his spindly little head and disappeared. A moment later, Derek heard a stapler and staple scatter all over the floor. Hey! Derek smirked. The pygmy goat. Lonnie caught him smirking and gave him a laugh at Bob's predicament. Derek, do you know if I should get these documents notarized before I file them? Derek pretended to have a look. Well, Lonnie, I'd ask Pete before you do anything. Sometimes you need clarification. When I get those types of documents, I usually make sure what Miss Stone wants done with them before I walk away. They were just for filing, but hey, if Lonnie wanted to risk his boss Pete because neither of them knew their job, who was Derek to stop them from annoying each other? Besides, Lonnie was like the farm dog, licking and sniffing where he shouldn't. Let him find out if his master was in a good or bad mood today. Merle popped up, nose twitching, then quickly popped back down, a sure sign that the groundhog had spotted danger. Derek quickly shoved the donut to the side and began typing. A moment later, Mr. Stone Sr. strode past, tall, thin, his close-cut fringe showing off his balding head. What was the portrait called, with the farmer and his wife with that pitchfork? There went Farmer Stone, and all the little animals pretended to behave in his presence. Derek briefly wondered what animal he played in all this. He hoped it was the fox. He is rather partial to that idea. Derek, office. Cynthia strode past. He sighed and grabbed his phone for note-taking before following her. He was not a fox. He was probably the tired old draft horse, sore and neglected, but still being put to harness to work a full day in the hot sun. That was depressing. And Cynthia was definitely a dragon. As soon as Derek closed the office door, Cynthia frowned at him. Do you have a license? She immediately inquired. Excuse me? Derek asked. He was a little surprised by this line of questioning. A driver's license. Do you have one? Cynthia repeated. Yes, he said cautiously. It was dusty. Derek didn't know what he'd been thinking even bothering to take the test years ago. He lived almost downtown. He worked downtown. It was prohibitively costly to own a car in the inner city, so Derek had never bothered. Good, she sighed in relief. Do you have one? Derek inquired. Now he was concerned. She didn't expect him to drive, did she? Yes. It just occurred to me that it would be best if we both were able to drive, especially now that there's going to be a commute. Cynthia frowned. You should find out from my building if I can sublease my condo. If not, I'm going to have to put it on the market. There's no point in keeping it if I'm going to be moving in with the kids. Allison was adamant the kids remain in their own home. She won't let me move them to a bigger condo downtown. 5 kids. Do you really think you're going to find a downtown condo big enough? Derek said dryly. With enough money, you can do anything. Cynthia gave him a look like he was silly. I haven't driven in 10 years, Derek warned her. What? She looked at him in surprise. I don't have insurance either. He thought she should be informed. Then you need to get some lessons and get some insurance. Cynthia dismissed his concerns with a wave of her hand. She stopped as a thought came to her. It's probably like riding a bike. It'll come back to you with a little practice. What is it? Derek had suspicious of her sudden pause. He wondered when he was going to schedule in driving lessons, since he didn't think it was going to be anything like riding a bicycle. Cars were much bigger and went a lot faster. I'm going to have to give up my car. Cynthia sat down in her chair with a thump. It's a 2-seater. Derek sat, crossing his legs and watching her. I love my car. It's brand new. She looked at him in alarm. It has a sunroof, leather, all the gadgets. It's not a mom car, Derek said sagely. He was enjoying this. Cynthia sucked in a breath of horror. I'm going to have to get a minivan. He nodded with glee. Derek shouldn't be happy at her reaction, but it was priceless. I'm going to become one of those soccer moms, baking cookies for PTA functions, going to school plays that have bad acting, ferrying the kids around in a minivan. She leaned back and put a hand to her forehead. This is a disaster. Derek shrugged. He could think of worse things to happen, but if she was this fixated about a minivan, he'd play into her fears. Be sure you get one of those DVD players in the back to keep the kids quiet. Otherwise, you'll just be trapped in there with them talking to you. They have those? She tilted her head and looked at him with hope. He nodded. How are you going to schedule all this? I mean, buying a van, all the kids' programs. You know, each kid is probably going to have their own specific activity that they belong to. This is going to eat into your work time. You're helping me, she pointed a finger at him. I'm giving you a raise, remember? He certainly did. There was no way she was going to let him forget it. That doesn't mean that we can keep working at the same pace. We need to reduce our clientele and caseload. Otherwise, neither of us is going to have time for these kids. With Allison breathing down her neck, Cynthia knew they had to be her first priority. What about the Barnes case? We're supposed to meet them for the preliminary interview tomorrow. You'll have to pass, Derek shrugged. Let someone else have it. She pouted. It's an open and shut case. It won't even be hard. That may be, but we've got more than we can handle right now, Derek said. You've got a funeral in 2 days. You're going to get the kids tomorrow. Life as you know it has changed. He stood up, but paused at the door. You'd better get on that minivan shopping. Derek chuckled when she threw her stress ball at him as he exited the office. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this chapter, please look for the next chapter of Sweet Valentine. Please also subscribe to the channel to enjoy other audiobooks, helpful videos, and insights into writing. This is free for you and would really help me grow my audience with the algorithms. Thank you.